Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our Senior Advocacy Forum on Medicaid updates and changes. Like always, we'll give a few minutes for people to join on, so I'll be back in just one moment. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Brian Tully. I am the founding attorney and the managing partner here at Tully Law Group. We are an elder care and an estate planning firm based Melville and out in Riverhead, Long Island. We have a great program today scheduled. Let me stop sharing my screen. So here we are. We are joined today by two experts in the Medicaid field. We're going to be talking about updates and changes. But before I get started, like always, I'm going to ask for somebody in the audience to please let me know that you can see all three of us. And Dennis, say something or that we can hear you. Hello,
Yes.
Dennis. And Jim.
Good afternoon.
There we go. All right. So please let us know in the Q&A box or the chat box that you can hear us and see us. And that way we know that everything. All right. We're good. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so joined today by Dennis McCoy and Jim Sluder. The introductions are again Medicaid expert period, but I'm going to give you a little more background just so we can know more about them. So Dennis is a senior associate attorney and the director of Medicaid here at Tully Law Group. He concentrates his practice in the areas of Medicaid planning, eligibility, and the applications for our clients. His legal skills, and I know this firsthand, are augmented by his health science background, which he effectively uses every single day to assist our clients in securing the necessary and critical healthcare services that our clients need. Now, we are also fortunate to have Jim Sluder. He is currently the Medicaid director for Suffolk County Department of Social Services. He spent 19 years working in the Suffolk County Medicaid division. Jim previously served as the head of training and procedures for Medicaid in Suffolk, where he conducted in-house trainings, as well as several community advocacy presentations, of course, throughout Suffolk. So Secondly, then I'm going to welcome Dennis and of course, welcome Jim. Thank you both for joining us. We have a record number of registrants and attendees at this event. Why? Because community-based Medicaid, which we're going to be focusing on, is such a needed, such a necessary, such a helpful topic. Now, today, of course, our discussion for those that are watching, it's not legal advice. This is not going to be something actionable for you to do. It's not specific to a specific person. We're here having a discussion about the state of community-based Medicaid here in New York, but more particular here in Suffolk County, all right? The goal is to go for about 40 to 45 minutes as a discussion and then break out into questions. So if you have questions, chat box or Q&A box as you see them, enter your question in there and we'll get to it at the end, all right? We are going to cover a lot. We will have this recorded. It is being recorded, and we'll have it posted on our website by this evening. Okay. So if you wish to watch it again, go to tullyelderlaw.com, TULLY, elderlaw.com. There are our webinars and our events. So you can even see past webinars that deal with other Medicaid topics we've discussed, asset protection concerns, estate planning issues. We've been doing webinars monthly and weekly at times ever since 2020. Okay, so now to get started, I'm going to be asking a couple of questions to kick off the discussion. Bottom line is, in working with clients, and it's something that I've been doing for 25 years as an elder law attorney, families want to stay home. That's the bottom line. Of course, there can come a time when safety would dictate that a facility or an institutional placement may be best for the client, for the loved one, and for the family. But the goal is to stay home. So we're going to be focusing on home care as we go through the discussion today. And as Jim knows, as Dennis knows, home care Medicaid has been going through some changes since 2020, and it's going to continue to go through changes as we move forward. We're going to be dealing with 5 different topics today: Medicaid recertifications, home care assessments, care eligibility, dealing with the activities of daily living, a brief topic on pooled income trusts, and of course, the look back period that we've been, that's kind of been hanging over our heads for a couple of years at this point. All right. Now, we're all set, Jim and Dennis, you guys are good?
Yep.
All right, very good. Good. Okay, so first things first, Medicaid recertifications. So I'm going to ask Jim a question, and then of course we'll look at how that applies, and Dennis can of course share how that applies practically in dealing with our clientele moving forward. So for those not familiar with Medicaid or hearing about this for the first time, Medicaid has a community-based program and it has a chronic care program. Community Medicaid is the home care program. Chronic care Medicaid is the nursing facility program. Once somebody is on benefits, receiving the Medicaid benefits, there is an annual recertification, meaning that they have to share how they are still eligible for the benefits. Now, during the pandemic, that was on hold for the most part, to put it in plain speak there. But Jim, can you share what they're calling the unwinding of continuous coverage that started during COVID and continued, and it's finally coming to an end as of in New York as of July 1st, 2023. So what can you share about that, please?
Correct. So we are beginning our unwind process. So what that means is renewals are resuming. We process renewals. Every consumer is required to renew their Medicaid eligibility once a year. So what we're doing is resuming that process. So whatever month a consumer renewed previously, if you recall from 3 years ago what month that was, you're probably going to get a renewal that same month going forward. So we just issued our first batch. So that's cases with anyone's eligibility ending June 30th, which would then pick up for July 1st, and we'll continue each month sending out renewals. It'll work basically the same as it always did, with a few less rules and a few more rules that apply more on our side than to a consumer, to try and help more people renew.
Okay, right. So the like you said, it's been so long since people have renewed, right? So there are people on Medicaid that have never had to renew, as
Correct.
opposed to the priors, right? So Dennis, how do you see families handling this, interacting with this? I know we've been reaching out to our clients and preparing them for this, but talk to me a
Right.
little
Well,
bit about
just recently, within the last month, we've gotten pretty much about 20 recertifications on previous clients, and they're asking for updated information. The things that clients would have to know is that their banking and their income has changed dramatically over the past 3 years since the last recertification. And the one big change that would be is the income amounts that came out in 2023, which dramatically increased from when they first signed up for Medicaid. Their
Mm.
original recertification back in 2021, if they applied for Medicaid, was probably what, about $854 a month in income. And now we're at, for a single person, it's actually $1,677 a month.
Right.
So that's a very big change. So if they had a pooled income trust to put an overage into, that's going to change. Maybe some people do not no longer need a pooled income trust. Of course, the IRA amounts have differed dramatically due market fluctuations and people taking out of their IRAs. So there's a lot probably to do with recertification that clients who never did one are going to need help with. Because it's something that's unknown. They've had Medicaid for several years and they're going to be very confused about it, I would think.
Right. No, that's a great point, right? It's not just we're starting recertifications. There's been such a drastic change in people's personal income as well as the allowable amounts by the county. Great point. Great point. Now, the reality that some families may not need, some individuals may not need the pool trust, that again, it's going to have to be a case by case basis. So the bottom line there is, if you've, to those viewers, if you've worked with an experienced elder law attorney in the past, then go back to that elder law attorney. Of course, we're here if there's questions, because that recertification is going to have greater implications, greater impact than just simply completing the recertification form. All right, so great points. Anything to add to that, Jim? We're good?
Before we move off renewals, I'll just point out the one major change that will impact consumers that makes it easier, that we don't have any more information on other than the statement I will make, is that for the unwind period, so for the next 12 months at renewal, resources are not being evaluated. That's a big change. So the renewal will ask about resources because the form has not changed. However, resources are not being looked at renewal when we redetermine eligibility. So that will simplify the process for many people. It'll simplify it for Medicaid employees themselves.
Right.
And it's one less complication of things to report and things that we have to look at
Right.
upon renewal.
Okay.
That is only at renewal.
If
Only
I can
at
add,
renewal.
right, and I
Not
can
not application, obviously, not application, and it's this first year only.
Correct. As of now, it is this 12-month period only. Correct.
Thank you,
right,
Jim.
and to
Yeah.
add to that too, the resource amount this year went up so dramatically, so it probably wouldn't affect those recertifying anyway, because the last year's resource allowance was 16,800, and now it's 30,182. So it's
Right.
dramatically increased. So even so, it wouldn't really affect a lot of people that are already on Medicaid because they're already used to such a lower amount of resources.
Right.
Right, but let me ask what that means though from a practical perspective. So if I'm sitting here as a child of a loved one on Medicaid, the fact that they're not going to look at resources, what does that mean to me? Why I don't have to give the bank statement, I don't have to give this. What does it mean? What is it different for me?
You really never needed to give it for the most part at renewal anyway. It's an attestation. But for those that perhaps there was a change in circumstance, but their coverage needs remain the same,
Mhm.
if that was a concern that they would now no longer be eligible, and like Dennis said, the resource level has gone up so dramatically.
Yeah.
Many people won't be determined ineligible based on their resources anyway. I know I would be very eligible based on the resource level.
Right.
But for those that did, maybe there was a significant change.
Yeah.
We won't be looking at that resource amount for renewal as long as there's no change in their needs. So if they're going to a higher level of care,
Right.
we would have to look at it. But at renewal, we will not.
Great, very good point. Very good point. And as I shared also, we've been letting clients and just residents and the consumers know in general, this is happening. Of course, there are other resources out there sharing that this is going to be happening. And the worst thing a recipient or the family can do is just ignore it. They need to address, because you haven't been getting them, or maybe it's the first time you're getting it, do not ignore anything from the county, period. Okay. Now, and what, Jim, if I may say an aside here, what's great having you on board is Medicaid isn't some big monster hanging out in Hauppauge or Ronkonkoma, right? Medicaid is workers, it's people in our community, it's people that are trying to help and do their job. So
Right.
I'm grateful you're here.
Thanks.
Now, moving on to activities of daily living. Now, oh, forgive me, that's the next topic. I want to go back to the home care still. When we're looking at home care, this is the second topic. There's always going to be a financial, there's going to be, the way we break it down, there's a financial component, there's a legal component, there's a care component. There have been assessments for the last 10 years or so that have been occurring at the end of towards the end of the application process to determine whether or not the person meets the definition for long-term care services, and then to help evaluate how much care would actually be covered. So Jim, can you explain this, again, changes that are happening? Can you share the new process for securing home care services, specifically talking about what we call NIA, the New York Independent Assessor? All right, so
Right.
please, let's get into that.
So, several years ago, the state introduced a conflict-free evaluation enrollment center, or they call it CFIC, who had a role in some of the evaluation. They've now expanded that role to be the primary assessor. So where my staff would be going out and conducting the assessment for home care, it is now this agency, NIA, New York Independent Assessment. So there are two tracks. The standard track, someone that is in need of home care, if they contact us, we're going to send them directly to NIA as long as they already have Medicaid. If they don't have Medicaid, we have to establish Medicaid, just general Medicaid eligibility first. Then they get sent over to speak to the independent assessor, who sets up an appointment, schedules the assessment appointment, the clinical appointment with a doctor, a nurse practitioner, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's up to the consumer to come back to us, to my nursing staff, to say, okay, here's my approval for whatever services I'm looking for. And we pick up from there and we determine their plan of care. We still do our version of an assessment or an evaluation, and we authorize those services. That's the track A. There's also the immediate need track, the need for immediate care, immediate needs for, which is probably what we see more of these days, which is totally understandable. That's a slightly different track. At that point, the consumer comes to us, they still come to us first, and we facilitate a call with the independent assessor. We actually are on there with the consumer. We get whatever we needed before, it hasn't changed. We get a form that verifies that there's an immediate need. And then we work with the consumer on a three-way call to set up the assessment appointments for the consumer. From there, it follows a similar path, although expedited, where the consumer sets up those appointments. NIA has 6 calendar days to set up and conduct all of those assessments, the 2 assessments, and then they hand it off back to us, where we pick up and follow up and do our plan of care and authorize the coverage. So this independent assessor has kind of stepped in the middle of the process to take over some of the role.
Understood. So again, if I'm sitting here as the child of a loved one applying for Medicaid or thinking about Medicaid, put immediate needs over here for the time being. How many assessments are there going to be entirely? What is the?
There is one assessment, then there is one clinical appointment, and then our nurse or managed care nurse, depending on the consumer, will still do what I'm going to use air quotes to say assessment. It's technically not an assessment, although it's an evaluation. So there would be 3 components where an outside entity would work with you.
Thank you. All right. So that's the non-immediate needs.
Correct.
All right. And then if we go the immediate needs, which, as we all would hope, I mean, the word immediate doesn't always mean immediate. We know that. So what are we up to then because I know that's what they're increasing, right? So in immediate needs world, how many interactions?
Same 3 interactions. in a slightly different, well, same order, just a different time frame.
Okay, all right. And Dennis, how are we seeing that work out for
Well,
clients?
prior to NIA coming in, the New York State assessor, if you had an immediate needs case, you turn in a physician's order with the case. The case would be split up with the eligibility worker work on the financial eligibility, and then the physician's order would go over to the nursing unit, and they'd set up and they'd call out to the consumer and try and arrange for an assessment. And that would have been the assessment to start the process.
Right.
And then you would go to a direct Medicaid agency and you get the case serviced. Now with NIA coming in, and as a necessity, there's nothing the county or any county can do. It's New York State. This is their regulations now. So you're going to turn in the same case immediate needs. And the assessment form is going to be peeled off again and go over, or it's called it's a attestation from the client. It's also a physician's order, which is now a different form. So that goes over to the nursing division. The nursing division is going to try and make the first NIA phone call with the client to set up an appointment. Then there's an appointment with a NIA assessor, the assessment that Jim is talking about. That's the first one. Then that gets done. So that takes several days. They have 6 days to do it. Then after that, the clinical assessment that Jim spoke of, you can consider it another assessment. And all these two together are what's going to say, okay, this person qualifies for Medicaid home care. Then it gets given back to the Department of Social Services local for a local Department of Social Services assessment, where they will assess the number of hours and start servicing the case. So it has slowed it down. These necessary steps that have been now instituted have slowed it down, whereas you had one assessment to start care, now you have 3.
Right.
Not to say there's anyone can do anything about it, but that's just, and we move as fast as we can. But it's all the more important to get care. Don't wait, because we can't even do immediate needs as fast as we used to. And that whole process, before you actually have it, then if the Department of Social Services assesses and gives you 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it is, then you have to find an aid. That whole process could take a month and a half, and that's moving pretty quickly.
Right.
So that's a lot slower, whereas the immediate need, you still have to find, the way it used to be with the Department of Social Services, you still have to find an aid, but you were out looking for an aid within a week to 14 days. Now you may start looking for an aid, or have the ability to look for an aid to service a case 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. It's a big difference. So
especially when there's
they're all following the guidelines, but it goes a little slower than it used to.
Right. And Jim's hands are tied. Jim is doing what he can and sharing what he can.
But no, Jim didn't draft the regs. This is it's not his fault.
No, and I can say, when it comes back to us from independent assessor, our steps are the same, and we are turning those out at the same rate that we were before. It's everything in the front end, like Dennis said, that there's extra pieces to that puzzle now that have to get done before we can finish up the process and turn it over. So it is a bit of a slower process for sure.
Right. And I will agree with what Jim says. The staff at the Department of Social Service, the nursing staff, are moving as fast as they were before. They still are expediting the cases. They still treat it very seriously. They're also frustrated when they're making the phone calls and being put on hold. It's frustrating their process as well. They'd like to get it off their desk and they can't. This is Nassau and Suffolk counties both are turning around assessments, and from what we see, very, very quickly. When it gets back to them, it's being done. It's being scheduled. So they're utilizing their staff very efficiently at this point. Good. And where before NIA came in, the cases were meeting the 6-day deadlines, and they were being turned out as quickly as the regulations said. They really were. They kept to it.
Great. So you touched on something there, Dennis. In dealing with families, just general advice is, because there is some state of flux and because there are changes being implemented, delaying can just cause more frustration, more cost, more stress. As I tell clients all the time, and you've heard me before on these webinars, is if we end up in a crisis, okay, a crisis situation, meaning there's a need for care and we don't have the ability, or the family doesn't have the ability to provide the care, crisis will always be more stressful. A crisis will always cost more, and a crisis will always have less options. So by getting families to plan in advance and enter into the system before the crisis or as things are starting to bubble, if you will, then you're able to at least minimize the crisis, hopefully, with these extended timeframes and assessments and interactions. Right. So good. Anything to add to that, Jim?
Uh, the only thing I would add is like, and Dennis touched on this, it's helpful as a family member trying to set this up for another family member. It is very helpful to, while this is all happening, look at agencies that you might be interested in working with. Try and do a little bit of that legwork that doesn't fall to, unfortunately, the Department of Social Services or the independent assessor. It's really, at the end of the day, the family that chooses where they'd like to take this approved service. You can do that legwork and research so that as soon as you have what you need, the approval, you can get that going. There's no reason not to at least do some research beforehand while this is all happening, because you'll feel like your hands are tied, you're stuck, you can't do anything. So do that research. This way you can hit the ground running once you are ready to get those services.
Great points. Great points.
And if I may, to Jim's point, it's very important too. Sometimes through the CDPAP program, when you're hiring your own aides, have your aides lined up and ready. That's a whole nother program through Medicaid, which we don't have time to talk about now, but it's where you can hire, fire, and train your own aides as long as they're legal to work in the country, and are willing to accept what Medicaid pays. They can sign up with a Medicaid agency, and they could be family, friends, family members, neighbors, people from the church, and then they can service your case. You already have the aides lined up, to Jim's point.
Right. Exactly. And all the help you can get during this process is going to make the family, it'll be a more efficient process. It'll be a more stress-less process if possible. Now, the way that we do it is we have elder care coordinators on staff. So I have a registered nurse, I have a geriatric social worker. We help the families and hold their hands through this process, together with, of course, Dennis running the Medicaid department. And it tries to make things as efficient as possible. Now, moving on to our next topic, which is going to be a little bit, of course, more about home care and the assessments, getting into the trenches a little bit. The assessments are meant to determine again, whether the care need is there, and then the level of care that would be covered by the county itself. A lot of this is based on what's called the activities of daily living, all right, the ADLs. We've been relying on using the ADLs for the vast majority of Medicaid applications for years. The activities of daily living, just as a background, are things that we do every morning. For example, you get out of bed, that's called transferring. You walk to the bathroom, you toilet, you bathe, you groom, you dress, and you eat. Those activities of daily living, again, are going to be the basis for the functional need that Medicaid is going to need to see. Now, under the current regulations, Jim, we're looking at being able to demonstrate that a client, an applicant, needs assistance with 2 of the activities of daily living. Several years ago in 2020, when the new law was being brought to attention and being signed, but not yet implemented, there was a point where we were going to be increasing it from 2 activities of daily living to 3 activities of daily living, where physical maneuvering was actually going to be required. So it was going to be a higher threshold and a little bit more level of attention that would be needed as well. So what can you share about that, Jim?
Okay. So what I can share is what the state has said just about an hour ago to us. At this time, there is no change to those ADLs. It remains at 2. They do not have a timeline of when it will increase to what they're insisting is not 3, but is more than 2.
Fair.
I don't know. There's a legal distinction there. I'll leave that to you, but it is more than 2. And I feel safe and comfortable saying it will at least be April of next year before we see that increase. I would, at this point, I don't know when it will be, nor does the state, but they have told us it should be at least a year from now, if not more, before we see that change implemented.
So there's an if in there somewhere. I mean, so it's okay. Right. And again, things can change, and that's, Jim is sharing what he can, and everything he's sharing can change. The state's involved there. So that's good to hear, the 2 ADL threshold. Dennis, comments on that?
No, I think that's excellent, because that's what we're used to right now. And basically, to require more, you could wind up hurting people. Let's say someone needs help in one little area and the two ADLs means they really can't be left alone and they really need a lot of assistance and keep them safe and at home.
Yeah.
They say, no, now make it 3. Well, 2 was good enough. You add another one, it's like, okay, now it's a lot harder. The bar has been raised and maybe unnecessarily, I don't know. I would have to see more on that of what ADLs, what are they going to say and what they're going to qualify, because they could also say, I don't know, Jim, you may not know, or you may know, are they're going to state the ADLs that are more important than others? In other words, say, okay, so let's say ambulation is my ADL, right? That's only one, right? But ambulation, all the other ones come with it. Because if I can't ambulate, I can't transfer in toilet, so I got 3 right there. What if I can't toilet? Well, that's kind of important to have just that one ADL. Okay, but then I guess I can't transfer, but I can ambulate. So toileting, and so is that good enough? Maybe not. If you wanted to, you got to add a third one on there.
Mhm.
Or is it going to be a combination with IADLs, cooking, cleaning, laundry, those types of things? So it'll be interesting to see. I'm glad to see for right now that it is staying the way it is because we're used to it. Your side's used to it, the practitioner's side's used to it, and we know we're on a level playing field. When you start changing that, no one's going to really know what to do unless they're very specific or precise. And history has shown us that DOH is never very specific or precise on a lot of different things. And that leaves, I'm sure, Jim's department into a tizzy in a way because you don't know how to apply it.
The point you raise is a good one, and it's the same point that we've at multiple counties have brought up. So I don't know the answer, but I know that discussion has happened as far as, are there more important ADLs? Is there, what are the exact specifics that will be implemented?
Right.
And since they're not implementing it this time, we haven't obtained that policy yet.
Okay.
But they've assured that we will.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jim. And good point, Dennis. The next point, moving on to the 4th topic. As our clients are navigating through the home care Medicaid application process, we were talking about income earlier. The reality is that there's, of course, a threshold as to what Medicaid, community Medicaid allows a applicant recipient to keep. Now, if they have greater income, Social Security, retirement account distributions, pensions, etc., a very common and necessary tool that we use is what's called a pooled supplemental needs trust or a pooled income trust. Each state kind of has their own way of dealing with excess income in a community Medicaid setting. New York utilizes these pooled income trusts. Now, back again, 2020, when the new law was rolling out, I do recall one of the points that was referenced is that if there was, and I guess I can't explain this without going a little more into detail, the way the pooled trust works is excess income is deposited, transferred into the pooled income trust, and then that pooled trust will then pay the Medicaid recipients' bills to help keep them in the community safely. There's the little nutshell explanation. Now, if there's a $3,000 deposit into the pooled trust monthly, and if the applicant can only use $2,000 every month, that means there's $1,000 excess. Under current law, there's always been the ability to roll that money over during the applicant's recipient's lifetime. It's what we call use it or lose it, but the use it or lose it part lasts during the lifetime of the recipient. So if we have $1,000 not used in month 1, it rolls over to month 2 and can be used then. And after 10 months, for example, there could be $10,000 built up there. The lose it part under current law is that if there's money left over in that pooled trust account when the Medicaid recipient passes on, then that balance is lost by being paid out to the underlying charity. Now, again, what I did see in the early regulations or the early law as it was first came out in 2020 is that there was going to no longer be a rollover permitted, meaning that at the end of each month, if it's not all spent, there was going to be some sort of ramification that was not positive. It was going to be a negative, something negative as far as perhaps lost, penalized, or whatever possibility. And in talking to Jim about this, I wanted to get your opinion or thoughts on it as to whether it's something that you've seen building, developing, no longer existent. What are your thoughts?
I am not familiar with that, but and
Good.
you had mentioned it to me just before the call, and I'm thinking about it. To clarify, with that pooled trust, we
Yeah.
look at deposits of that excess income going in each month.
Mhm.
What happens with those funds as far as Medicaid eligibility? We're not looking for that on a monthly basis for eligibility purposes. So that rollover you're talking about, we would still, even if you've rolled over money that you're going to use for something else on the back end in the trust,
Mhm.
we would still want to see that you deposited that's the full amount each month.
Yep.
So that explains why my eligibility team at the state hasn't talked about that provision to us,
Okay.
because for us, we still need to see that money going in each month to exclude it from your Medicaid eligibility.
Yep.
So I don't know whether that provision is going into effect or not, because it won't affect my program. It will affect consumers, which I totally understand. And I'm interested to see what they do with that.
Yeah, good, good. And I'm glad you don't know about it, because if you knew a lot about it, that would mean things are percolating. Dennis, any comments on that, or we're good?
No, that's good with that. Yeah, I heard that initially. I remember you saying it. So when it first came out in 2020, that was like a push of what to do with the excess into the pooled income trust, and then it sort of went away. So maybe it was just pulled back, and they just couldn't effectively figure out what to do, what to penalize, what to do with the money, I guess.
Right, right. Okay, good. So moving on to our final issue, and we'll spend the balance of our time, hopefully the next, let's say 6, 7, 8 minutes on this, the look back period. All right. We've been talking about a look back period for community Medicaid since April of 2020, if not before. Now, again, for our viewers that may not be familiar, a real brief description. As of right now, New York has a 5-year look back for chronic care Medicaid, which is the nursing home Medicaid program. And community Medicaid does not have a look back period per se. Now, the law that was signed into play back in 2020 was going to institute a 30-month or 2.5-year look back period for community-based Medicaid applications filed after a certain date. But it's been postponed due to the pandemic for the last couple of years. Now, Jim, where do we stand on that? I do have a couple of sub questions, and again, we'll spend a little bit of time on this. So let's start off with, what are the proposed regulations? Let's start there.
The proposed regulation is exactly that. You summarized it perfectly, really short and sweet. We would, for applications for consumers seeking home care, we would look at resources going back and transactions going back 30 months, two and a half years. Similar to a nursing home application, we would evaluate that monies were given away for the purposes of becoming eligible for Medicaid. We would be reviewing to see if there were any, what we would call a prohibited transfer, and penalties would be applied to that. We were gearing up for this. We were getting ready. There were trainings getting ready to be scheduled. Then there was a pandemic. And as of this moment, what I can say is that it has been delayed as well until at least 2024. I confidently believe this will not go into effect while we are in the unwind. So these 12 months of renewals, I don't believe we're going to see this happen for the next 12 months from right now, which would still be in 2024. Don't know a timeline of when it could happen, and nor have we gotten detailed policy guidance from the state on how it will happen, which is what tells me that it's not happening anytime in the next year, because we have not received the official guidance yet.
Okay. So before Dennis jumps, so the April 1st of 2024 that we've heard loosely about, may or may not be a start date for that look back period?
May or may not be a start date for that period. I'm not a betting man, but I don't believe April 1st will be the start date. But I'll say it could be, because I don't want to say something.
Fair, and that's what we've been saying. Okay, so the setting you shared though was because, or not because, but during the 12 months of the research and that reopening, that might be enough on everybody's plate.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. All right, Dennis, thoughts
Yes.
on that, and before I get to the next question.
Right, well, I would say that's a fair assessment by Jim, because I didn't think about that either, because the unwind is gonna take all the way till next May. And that's 1/12 of the whole caseload of every single county has to be recertified. It would be kind of unfair and not say the fairness really matters, but it would be overwhelming for a department to try and do both the unwind and trying to figure out the new regulations which already been drafted yet, that we know of. There might be a draft of them, but they've never been shown to anyone. So the training and everything else while trying to do the unwind would seem unreasonable. It would seem to be a big failure, actually. How would you keep both balls in the air? It would seem almost impossible
Mhm.
with the current staff. So there's a lot of pieces to it. So I would say that would put us past May, at least, and probably sooner later than that, maybe towards the end of the year. I'd imagine. I didn't think about that. That was a good point, Jim. I didn't think about that. Doing the unwind and trying to institute the look back period would be, I don't know how you would accomplish it.
Yeah,
Right.
there's also a federal component to this, and I don't know, because I haven't checked in several months, whether they actually ever receive full federal approval to implement it. That could be a holdup. And there's a lot of rules that go along with coming out of the public health emergency, where we're not able to make certain changes to programs. So it could be tied to some of that. Like, I know for a fact, the ADL change we talked about, that's tied to some funding related to coming out of the pandemic. So this might be tied into that too, which would stop us from stop the state from making that change for some time.
Okay, Jim, can you share what is the process going to follow the same process as it does for nursing homes? Is it going to be the same, the same review? Is it going to be the same regional rate? How penalty calculation?
That I don't know. That's the level of detail we haven't received. We don't know, if we're looking at that regional rate, not to confuse anyone out there that doesn't know what we're talking about, don't worry about it. But we don't know the details of that. All we've gotten really is a high level of, it's the same idea. You would look back and review for transfers, but beyond that, no real detailed programmatic changes have been rolled out.
Okay, all right, Dennis, comments?
Yeah, but yeah, so it goes to your same point, Brian. I would like to know myself, and Jim doesn't know, it's just a general question.
Yeah.
Are you going to apply the same chronic care transfer penalty rules and protections that exist? We just don't know at this point. A question that comes to mind as well, and I think someone on the board had mentioned it. If you apply before the look back, Medicaid is going to honor and grandfather in those previous applicants before the law goes into effect. They're not going to do a reach back and say, no, it actually went into effect 6 months ago type of thing.
Anyone already in receipt of the home care services is grandfathered in with no review. We're not going back and looking. It would be new requests for home care services.
So just to clarify, it's the application date then, not actually receiving services.
As far as I was last told, we believe it's new changes in need for home care. So if you are active, but we've never done a review and you now need home care, you are not grandfathered in. That could change.
Yeah.
So they could change that too if you were already active with Medicaid of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also just be that once you ask for home care services, we would go back and do that. That's gone back and forth over the 3 years that they talked about it previously. So I'm not sure yet where we land.
Okay. And though, again, because I sit with families and they're worried and they're concerned about timing and all that, if I try to break it down for, again, that son watching this for his mom and dad, and I understand the ambiguity because we just don't know the definitive answer yet, but is it safe to say and to share it in such a way that applications prior to the look back being instituted should be without look back?
So someone who was already applied and is not in receipt of home care.
So I'll give an example. So let's say let's say if they pick May 1st, so let's just say May 1st, this is going to commence. And somebody applies April 28th for community-based Medicaid services.
Okay, so they apply before the rule goes
Yes,
into effect,
applied
and
before.
they're asking for home care services.
For home care services.
Then that should be fine. It should, if you're in and approved, well, not even approved. If you're applying and requesting home care
Yes,
prior to the implementation date, then you've done it prior to the implementation date.
Very
Correct.
good.
That's always the way. Yeah.
got it. Thank you, Jim.
With that.
Okay, good. So I didn't mean to push there, but
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to. Okay.
No, yeah, I got it.
Now, what we've also been hearing rattlings about, because as of right now, the community Medicaid system is such where we have the financial assessment and then we get into the medical assessment. Is it going to be reversed, or is it going to remain in that same flow?
Great question. I love not having answers to anything you present, but you have all the same questions that I have. So that's great too, because it means we're on the same track. Again, as far as how the logistics are going to work out, we didn't get that level of detail because they didn't roll it out yet. So, and now factoring in the interim, we now have NIA. So the whole process has changed again. So if we stick to what we know about how it works now with the independent assessor, if it's not immediate need home care, they have to have established Medicaid eligibility before that process will begin. And so that should remain the same. We would do all of that look back and everything and determine eligibility before they would step in and start doing the assessment. I would then say, to be consistent with what they've done, my assumption, just a thought, I don't know for sure, is if it was immediate needs, then the same thing would happen. We would be doing those two processes concurrently. We would determine eligibility while the process with NIA begins. So it should maintain the same model because that's the way it works currently.
Okay. So, and you would expect NIA to be involved with it, not the personal physician, not any, you don't see any changes like that.
No, it's still a home care, and that's just, so
Okay.
it's just an expansion of that. Yeah, it would still be independent assessor.
Understood. Dennis, any questions, comments?
I'd like to see how that's going to work, only because, when
It's
you
so
track
good, Jim.
cases, right, when you track cases, if you got to track 31-step banking, it would seem that the department would rather have a medical assessment first to say, listen, do they qualify for home care through an assessment prior to having a worker track 30 months of banking to find that transfer. So if they don't qualify for home care assistance, why do a 30-month review? Because it's time consuming. And if you have enough cases, because I imagine that there's a lot more community-based Medicaid cases than there are chronics.
Right.
And you just only have so much time and so many workers. So if a lot of the cases get knocked out because medically they don't qualify, 2 ADLs, they just don't qualify. Why would I bother wasting time to do a medical review to create a transfer penalty that I can't impose? It wouldn't make any sense. But Jim's right. We just don't know what they're going to do. They haven't written anything. If he doesn't know it, I certainly don't know it. I don't know. We're just guessing. We're speculating of how it should be rolled out. And what if after all this talk, they never roll it out? So we're just much ado about nothing at this point. So we can really talk and focus on what we know with NIA and things that really do exist, the rollout of the recertifications, and just know that this is a very interesting problem. And until we know, we can't come up with a solution to how it would affect each individual family. We really just don't know. Just know that it's a possibility, and it is law at this point in the state of New York. The Department of Health has not drafted the regulations. It has not told, if you're hearing from a Medicaid director, that we really just don't have the nuts and bolts details yet. They're just not drafted. And when in the middle of a rollout, it's not going to be drafted for about another year, I would imagine. If that's a fair assumption at this point.
I believe it is. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else to share on that, Jim?
No, I think that, like Dennis said, the focus should, while we have these things that could happen and they're out there, I think the important thing to remember is, for anybody that's out there going, this is overwhelming, half of what we just talked about isn't today. So if you have a need coming up in the near future, don't worry about it. It's not there yet. We're not there yet.
Yep, great point, Jim. And as I start to wrap up this part of it before we head to the Q&A, timing is everything, folks. Those that are listening, those that are watching. As I shared, we've got other information on our website, tullyelderlaw.com. We provide free consultations to talk about these issues more. 631-424-2800. 424-2800 is the number if you wish to talk to us in person about these types of issues. Now, let's get into questions before we run out of time here. Okay, so, all right, now. All right, what is the resource limit? Dennis, can you spout
Yep.
that out? It's the,
Sure. Okay, resource limit, this is both for community Medicaid and chronic care Medicaid. It's not the income. Income and resources are two different things. If we're talking resources alone, that's what you have in the bank, stocks, bonds, annuity, not annuities, stocks, bonds, bank accounts, CDs, things like that, brokerage accounts. $30,182 for a single individual, for a couple on Medicaid, not both on Medicaid, that means,
Right.
not one, both applying for Medicaid, $40,821. That's not a month, that is the resource limit that you're allowed. That's what you're shooting for.
right, right. Now, and then there's a question here about a parent asking a question about a son's earnings. So we're talking about here long-term care Medicaid. Steve, if there's a specific question, just give a call, and we'll try to get an answer for you as to what you're specifically asking. Jim, question is, would Nassau be similar?
Yeah, I saw that come in, and whatever we said Nassau would be, I'm thinking back to everything we talked about, and everything we talked about today, it's policy DOH statewide. So yes, Nassau is similar. As far as even with the independent assessor, that's the same for them. You know, their office structure is different, but the process remains the same. It's a state process. So yes.
Very good. Another question, Jim. My mom's MLTC told me to expect a Medicaid renewal packet, like we were talking about, after the 1st. I haven't received it yet. Should I be worried? Should I be concerned?
No, because they didn't give you enough real information. They probably just are telling everyone it's after the 1st and doesn't matter what month. So it's a monthly process. I'll just repeat that. I can't repeat that enough. It's a monthly process. If this isn't the month that she would normally have gotten it, you may not know what month she normally would get it. That's fine. There's no reason to be concerned about that. I will just give 2 phone numbers. I don't know where, nor do I want to know where your mother lives, but if you are concerned, you can call 631, and if it's east end of Long Island, you can call the wrong office too. It's fine. They'll look you up anyway. Our Riverhead office is 852-3570. And then our Western office in Hopog is 853-8408. If you have another number, use that too. That's fine. But those are the 2 that we put on our website. You can call and ask, and they can tell you what month to expect the renewal. I will also tell everyone, put them at ease, that one of the rules that we have now implemented by the federal government is before we close your case for failing to renew, we have to make 2 attempts to verify that we have the correct address and that you received it. So we will be calling if we have your phone number, which is less likely to change regardless of your address. We will be calling before we close a case, and we'll be looking at other cases to see if the address is different. So we have some safety nets to help people make sure that they get recertified.
Wonderful.
So
thank you for sharing that, Jim. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Just a clarification on the next 2 points here. Yes, we were talking about community-based long-term care Medicaid services and a look back for that. And then another question, once approved for community-based care through Medicaid, if applying and being approved, I'm just scanning.
Hold on one second, Brian. The other question, I think that the person writing in is talking about, when they say regular Medicaid application, I think they might be just talking about health insurance Medicaid. I think that's what that question's meaning. So they're talking for community-based home care services. If they don't want that, if they just want like maybe through the exchange or a program like that, is there a look back period for that? I think that's what that question is touching on.
And the answer is no.
the answer is no.
Right. All right. Now, so once approved for community-based care through Medicaid, if applying and being approved for community-based Medicaid prior to the look back being implemented, does that grandfather the applicant in if at a later date than the 30-month look back is implemented? So what I'm gathering based on what we were talking about earlier, it sounds like, if you two gentlemen agree with me, that if the application is made prior to the look back but then approved after, that person should be grandfathered in without the look back, as long as it's home care.
It actually says, the question actually says applying and being approved prior. So absolutely.
Then absolutely yes to
grandfathered
that,
in.
right.
Absolutely. No, they would be grandfathered in.
Excellent. Question from, or does the MLTC determine the amount of hours awarded? Will they continue to be the ones to determine the hours?
The hours are either determined by the MLTC, if they're someone that's mandated to be in and manage long-term care plan, or it would be our staff for immediate needs, because we process all of those here locally before they're enrolled in an MLTC. But that has not changed.
Good. Next, have you had a webinar discussing when to apply for community Medicaid based on anticipated needs? That's going to go back to a point, Gary, that we've shared once or twice, in that you want to be as proactive as possible. There's certain eligibility requirements for community-based Medicaid and chronic care Medicaid. Again, we break that into legal eligibility, financial, and the care side of it. The care side of it is really going to be about those activities of daily living that we've been talking about. You should not be applying unless you meet that threshold. And again, we can talk about it during our free consultations and help you address that. What is the process of annual recertification? So I'll start it off by saying, well, you'll receive a packet in the mail, and then
I can do it if you want, Jim. It's up to you.
Or I'll test you, Dennis. Go for
All right,
it.
good, excellent. Let's see. All right, so Jim will correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, recertification, they're going to want current income amounts. So you're going to have a Social Security award letter that comes out. So it gives the new Social Security award amount. You got to give, if you have health insurance paid for privately, give them a premium. If you have a pension, current pension letter. Recertifications, except for what Jim said before, normally had current resources as well, your current bank statement with you. And then there's a form that you fill out and you turn it in. So it's all in the current resources. They want to reevaluate your financial eligibility for Medicaid, make sure you're still eligible, and change the numbers accordingly. Like we said this year, the income allowance went up dramatically. So then we're going to evaluate what your spend down or excess income is. So that's why they want current resources. Don't give Medicaid the 1099 for last year, because just like I said, it's last year's income. So the new, any COLA increases you get from pensions, any Social Security award letter, any new health insurance you pay privately for a supplemental plan, they'd have to see all that. And they used to want to see, but right now, Jim's saying right now that's on hold, but it's not a bad idea, because you're allowed $30,000 in resources to give the current resources that you have. If you have an IRA, you also have to give an IRA statement, so they recalculate the amount that you have to take out of the IRA monthly. Realize Medicaid a lot of times uses a different chart than the IRS uses. So that has to be maximized. So that gets all figured out as well. There's a different chart for that. There's a different calculation. They will tell you when they redo the case, they will tell you what the new spend down is. From that date, they usually give you an extra month from that date forward. That's the amount that has to be put into a pooled income trust, and that's your new spend down amount. How's that?
How's that?
Good, Jim?
That was good. I was going to give a warmer, fuzzier answer and just say, don't be scared. It's just a series of questions. If you answer something and we're confused by, or you leave something blank, we will contact you and ask you more questions to clear it up. You don't, so we don't want anyone to stress about filling out that renewal. Just answer what you can. It's pretty clear about send proof, or you don't have to send proof. It says it on the form. Just get it back to us and we'll ask any follow-up questions we need. So don't be intimidated by it. It's really not simple. It's really simple.
Well said. I want Dennis to be as technical as possible.
Yes.
I do. In the beginning, Jim, in the same vein here, the no resources, the question is, does that apply to New York City Medicaid? And the answer should be yes. It would be
the answer should be yes. If they're asking regarding, just to clarify, renewals and not looking at renewals, then that's a statewide thing. Yeah.
Yes, good. If a non-ill spouse receives a pension, but the ill spouse has no assets or income other than Social Security, but filed joint returns, can the ill spouse qualify for Medicaid? So that I don't know the attendee's name there. That's a real specific question. I'm not going to put that on Jim or Dennis at this point. It's where you should be talking to an experienced elder law attorney that does this type of work to help gauge that, as well as what can be done eligibility wise to help with making them eligible. We got a thank you there. Yes, renewals are community-based Medicaid and chronic care. Do DAC Medicaid cases still have to keep resources below 2,000? Jim or Dennis be able to answer that?
Yes, the answer is yes, as far as our chart, and I
Mhm.
believe has been updated. So yes, that has not changed. That is the SSI resource level, so that hasn't been altered.
That hasn't changed. All right. On that note, Jim, a real, true, heartfelt thank you for joining us. It's been great, and we know your hands are tied on certain things, but you've been able to give a lot of helpful advice. Dennis, as always, of course, I love talking to you about Medicaid, so thank you, and I'm sure our viewers also benefited by listening. Again, questions, comments, folks, you can reach out to us, 631-424-2800. And we can have a consultation to discuss how this applies and what you should be doing or not be doing. Again, Jim, thank you. Dennis, it's been a great day, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All right, where's that? There we go. Good. Bye-bye.